Okay, welcome everybody. My name is Philip and I am the solution engineer at MemoQ, and I will be guiding you through some of the concepts of managing multilingual projects with updates and how you can deal with that and what can you do about it. So we're going to talk about different aspects, but mostly we'll be focusing on some areas because it's a broad topic, of course, and it will be impossible to cover all the possible areas. So what's today's focus then? We will be talking about connecting MemoQ in general. So what can you connect? And we're going to talk about the content connector and how you can connect your projects through content connector and what can you connect actually through the content connector. So the content connector and the connection will be the keyword today. Then we're going to talk about templates. So the idea, what stands behind the templates. Most of you who have worked with MemoQ know the templates, but templates can be sometimes tricky, and we need to know what can be done with Content Connector and templates. They will be key to understanding how the updated projects will be working. Then we will show how to set up those connections, how to create those connections, how to manage the different rules in those connections, and why is that important. And at the very end, we will see that in action. Now, I encourage you to, of course, post messages in the chat window. So if you have any questions along the way, feel free to leave a message there. If I won't be able to answer them during the webinar, then we will try to answer them later on in writing. Let's move on. When you input files into a project, right, that can be done through different ways, right? You can just drag and drop it, right, and just put those files into into MemoQ. You can, of course, input with options to change those the way MemoQ will import those documents into a project. Then you can use those file system connectors, and this is what we're going to talk about today. And there are also other repository connectors, for example, connecting to GitHub, which is actually very similar to the file system connectors. There's a different mechanism to it, but in general, the whole idea is very, very similar. And then there are also other connectors that we are not going to talk about too much today, which is the via the API. One of them is through the CMS API that, for example, can connect you to WordPress. And the other one is the API, what we call the Web Services API, that connects to business management systems. But it can also connect you to different content systems, but usually requires a little bit of development work on our end. So today we're going to talk a little bit about file system connectors. And actually the question is, what can you connect with such a connector? And one of the things that you can do is, for example, connect cloud storage drives like Google Drive or OneDrive, for example, or OwnCloud. So anything that can synchronize, the cloud folder, let's say, with a local folder. The file system connector basically works in the way that it takes the files from a local folder and watches this folder for changes. So whatever appears in this folder, right, can then later on be imported into a MemoQ project. Now, let me just tell you a few words about the workflow templates, also the project templates. Of course, you know most of the project templates probably, and you know how they work. But as a very general idea, just to show you what we will be automating, we'll be trying to automate with those templates, is this simple diagram. So this shows in a very simplified form how a project is generally run. Okay, so all the different stages of the project along the way. And then when we think about introducing a template into a project, some of those elements can be either partly or fully automated within the template. And that's what happens. So we'll be talking today a little bit about all the different automations that will be sort of inserted into the template and how this will be connected to a particular folder. So let's have a look at the setup that will be necessary here. So we will be, first of all, we have to focus on the data synchronization. So you will need to have a way to synchronize or set up the synchronization between, for example, your Google Drive and your local computer or your local server in general, right? So how this would work, we will need to set up the folders to synchronize with the cloud service. When we're going to talk, and I'm going to show you in a moment, we're going to talk about Google Drive, for example. There are several different ways of doing that. There is this sync and backup service from Google that you need to install, and then you can set up either to a folder that will be syncing all your your cloud, so your My Drive, right, files from Google, or you would be selecting a folder on your local computer that you want to sync with Google Drive. Now, on top of that, there is also something that is called Shared with Me folder. Now, this is a folder that very often is shared by an external client. So an external client shares this folder, for example, with an LSP, with an agency, right? And they say, okay, look, we will drop our projects there, or we will just share our projects with you, and we want you to just input those files for you into your projects. Now, that is not so easy to set up directly. So you need a special app for that. It's called, it comes from a company called InSync, and it generally allows you to synchronize those folders, those shared with me folders as well. So they will create a local folder that will create a backup copy, so to speak, or but it will be synchronized with the client's folder as well. And I'm going to show you how this works as well. Now, then, once this is set up, right, we need to create this content connection. So this content connection happens on the content connector, which means that there's a separate piece of software, right, installed with MemoQ server as a content connection server, and then you have the content connection client. And the content connection server rights will generally, create those projects, and we will send those projects to MemoQ server. And with content connection client, we will be setting up those connections. So we will be defining which folders to watch. We will be defining not only that, but a few more elements. So first of all, we will be defining which languages we are going to translate into. We're going to define what kind of files should be imported, because maybe not all the files should be imported, and into which languages should those files be imported. So it's also a great place or a great way to decide which languages are going to be imported into a project. You remember when you import a file into a project, you have to choose which languages you want this file to be translated into. Here, it comes already predefined in the content connection. So we will generally be creating a connection definition, so to speak, between the folder that is synchronized with the cloud service and MemoQ. Then the next step will be the MemoQ template. And here is where we're going to talk a little bit about how to set up a MemoQ template for a project like this and what to look for, because there are some settings that will be necessary or they will be important to watch for to get the right way of working with this template. So that's what we're going to do. And then, of course, is going to be the project. The project will be, so to speak, a live project, because it will be an ongoing or holding project, some people call it. And this project will allow you to constantly, upload new content into this project. And with automatic assignment, for example, it will automatically assign these files to your translators. Okay, let's get cracking, because that's what we're here for. Okay, so let's start with the data synchronization. What we have here now is the Google Drive. Now, this is the Google Drive shared, for example, on the client side. So the client has a folder. Okay, I'm going to share, some files with MemoQ, meaning, the sharing with the agency, and I'm going to put a project there. Now, inside the project, I'm going to put some source files. Right, I'm going to have those source files here, and I want them to translate this. Now, the project, let's say the agency has this folder called shared with me, and in the shared with me, they will see this folder from the customer called shared with MemoQ, and they will see the projects inside, and they will see, okay, I've got a project A, and then I have my source file in it. Okay, this is what I'm going to translate. Okay, great, this is there. Now, this has to be synchronized with the local drive. For this, we need the application for InSync. The InSync allows us to synchronize this with the local folder, and that basically means that we are going to have a folder like this one, okay, on the local drive, and this folder will be synchronized with the customer. So whatever I put here, it will show up on the customer's end as well. So this is one way. Now, another way is that we actually share a folder with our customer. And when we share a folder with a customer, then the customer will be able to put files or projects there, and they will show up on our end. And this folder will be visible as well. So this is easier. This can be set up quite quickly. So let's say we're going to have this folder shared, that's a folder shared with me, but I might have on my drive, I might also have some other folders, and this folder will be called, for example, project 001, okay, where I also have source files, and I have some other source files as well that are put here. And this is another place, and this is also synchronized with the local folder. Let me just show you. I have it. Here we go. So this is exactly the same folder, but this one is just local. And it is synchronized via the Google service that has to be installed first. So we have this synchronized with this. The setup is fairly easy. Normally, when you set up the connection with Google, we just need to make sure which folders need to be synchronized. So this is usually, you can generally switch off synchronization of anything. You can just turn on, for example, synchronization of, just disappeared on me. Okay, give me a second. Yeah, here we go. Okay, so I could generally decide which folders from my laptop should be, for example, from my server, right, when you install it, okay, should be synchronized, or I could also synchronize which folders from my Google Drive should be synchronized. Now, so we have a folders set up, okay, now it's time to go to MemoQ and the MemoQ connector client. So let's just content connector client. And here we have a list of connections. Now, what are those connections? Maybe first, just to make sure that we understand what they actually mean. They are always connections to a particular folder. Okay, so they're watching a particular folder for changes. I have some that are created here already. You can create duplicates. Sometimes it's the easiest way if you, for example, have a shared folder. Let's say I have a shared folder from my customer that is called, project A, right? And then they create a project B, right? I will need to create a new connection. But the easiest way to handle that, if the setup is generally similar, is by cloning a connection. And it will clone all the settings inside. All I will need to do is change just change the connection to a particular folder. Let me show you how this would work. So first, let's go to our customers end. So they create this project A, but let's create project B. So I'm going to create project B, create, and I'm going to go inside, and I'm going to create a folder called, let's say, source. Now, why is that? Why I'm creating a folder called source? I could, of course, drop files directly in here, but later on we would need to create some particular exclusion rules to make sure that the files do not get imported even from the target folders, for example. So I've created this one. Now, if I go back to my let's say to the place where I'm looking at my projects, I see that the client's project is already visible here. Now there are no files there, so we will need to just put some files in here. Let me just quickly import some files from the. Okay, let me just put the same document here, just upload it. Okay, the file's uploaded. Now if I go to my project B and go to source, I will see this document already here. Now, what happens if I go to my folders? If I go to my folder from my customer, I will be able to see that that's project A. I already have project B, and I have my file already synced locally. So I have this file, this connection that I created for this other connection. Let's just clone this one, and let's work on this one together. So I'm going to create G Drive shared. Let's say project, let's say B. Okay, that's what I'm going to call it. And now what I need to do is just make sure that I connect this particular folder here. Okay, so I'm going to connect to project B source text. Now, as you can see, this is the definition of the connection. First of all, we have the file system connector. We have the name of the connection. We can even give it a description. We could even give it an authorization ID. It would be some kind of a password, so to speak, right? Or a way to filter, let's say, connections between different systems. Then we need to define the languages, and these languages are very important because these languages will not be possible to overwrite in the project. When we create a project based on a template, even if the template has 20 languages, it will only take those languages from the connection. This is much stronger than the template, so it will generally override the settings from the template. That is why it's important to set up those languages. Let's say we have those three, and that's enough for us. Let's go to content rules. Now, what are content rules? So the content rules, they basically allow us to define what kind of files should be imported into a project and into which languages. So here we just, let's say, using a wildcard, so using the asterisk, saying, okay, all files, so whatever we put there, okay, will be imported into those three languages. What does it mean? This allows us to define that all types of files will be imported into those languages. But we could, of course, make, let's say, change it, remove this binding, and let's just say that, okay, all files that are actually IDEA, let's say, doc files, so Word files, will be only imported into French. And then, let's say, IDML files will be only imported into German. And then Italian files will be, let's say, only XML files will be imported into Italian. So, of course, this doesn't really, in real terms, it probably doesn't make much sense. But we can imagine a situation where we want to have some files translated into, a group of languages, and then some other files translated into another group of languages. The exclude filters, what do they do? This is especially important if we want to exclude, for example, some folders from being imported from this folder. So if we put the target folders into the same place where we import those, when we take those files from, then it would be good to create some exclude filters to exclude the folders that from another input. Otherwise, we would be, constantly getting new files and new files from the target folders, for example, which wouldn't make sense. Now, the export rule is very important here. So we sort of define where our target files will go to. So with this rule, we will sort of follow the input root path. So this would be the place where we got the files. And then what will happen, what we want to do is actually, so this would be our source folder, right? And what we want to do is want to go out of the source folder. So that's why we have this backslash and then 2 dots and then another backslash. This takes us one folder up in the folder tree. So we one level up, and then we create a folder named with the target language code. And then on top of that, we put the relative path, which is if we have folders inside our folder and they will also be imported, then this would also be recreated here. So we would have folders within folders within folders that would be imported into the project. And then we put the original name and the extension. Now, this is one way of doing this, of course. There are other ways. You could, for example, add a suffix to the file name. If you want to, you might want to have a totally different path here. That's also something that you can define with this export rule. There are some, of course, other possible import settings. I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but basically there are some, particular ways that you can set up the import. Well, let's try and do the basic stuff here, and I think this should be enough for us. Now, because we defined it for Word documents, IDML files, and XML files, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy those two different types of files as well. So I have some two prepared, and we'll just put it into the into our client's side. So we put another two files as source, just one IDML file and one XML file. And they're already here. And of course, they're already here as well. So let's create a, so we have right now, we have the connection. Everything seems to be fine. We can actually, right now, we could even view files with these filters. So we would be able to see which files get imported. And this is what it looks like. So it will tell us, okay, this file will be included, this file will be included, this file will be included. And we see also for which language they will be included. So this is a way to check whether you set up those filters correctly. Because if there's something wrong, if something you wanted to exclude and gets included, then this is a place to, this is a time, right, to fix it. So this this setup is, is quite easy, but at the same time, you really need to have a clear idea how you want to import your files. The good thing is that you can fix this, of course, this this connection definition, and just decide, okay, we're going to import this differently. Actually, you can even fix some of these already when the project is running. So already then you can actually make some changes and then still get sort of different files from the folder. But usually I discourage that because that's just sort of trying to messing up with the setup. But if necessary, yeah, that's something you can do. Now let's say okay, we've got our connection for this G drive. I also have, and for this project B, we could have. This is actually which one we set up. We have the other one as well. So this one is already done. We could also connect this in a very similar way to other sources like Box, right? If someone uses Box or Dropbox or OneDrive, okay? So this kind of setup is really easy in that way and works very similarly. If I look, I have here something similar. So this is also a local folder from Google Drive that I'm synchronizing. And this looks very similar. So I have a similar setup here and similar projects and so on. So it's very similar in the setup. Now, let's move to MemoQ now. Okay, here we go. Now, what we need with MemoQ here is we need a good template. So we're moving to the next part. Let's move on to our resource console and let's open one of the templates. I've already created a template for this, but I'm going to take you through this template just to show you what we actually need for this whole setup. So for those who are not very familiar with templates, just a very brief introduction. A template is not just a predefinition of what project should look like. I mean, what, let's say, translation memories we should attach to this project, or let's say, which term bases should we use, or which languages we should use. Yes, that's also true, right? But it's not the only thing that a template does. And it's important that we actually have a way of working with those templates and being able to sort of tweak them to our needs. So those templates can really be very simple and can only be about resources. So setting up, let's say, translation memories. Sometimes people use a template for just creating translation memories according to a particular pattern. So they don't even create a project later. I mean, they don't use this project. They just use the template to create those translation memories. Imagine you have a project into 50 languages, and you need to first import the translation memories, and you haven't decided yet what the project is going to look like. You just have the naming convention for the translation memories, for example. You set it all up in the translation memories naming convention. You create a project with this template, an empty project, no files in it. It will automatically create translation memories based on this template. And then you can import files, your legacy translation memories, for example, or translation memories from your customers, and so on and so forth, into those newly created translation memories. So this is, of course, one way of using a template. Now, we're going to use templates a little bit differently. I mean, of course, we still need to set up the way the translation memory is going to work here. If we want to use live docs, right, we would need to have some kind of a naming convention here as well. So we're using those placeholders, and those placeholders will generally can be also, different elements. So they could be source languages, target languages, and so on and so forth. All the date even, right? So as you can see in the translation memories, I have chosen to create a project translation memory and a master translation memory. Now the working translation memory will be having the project's name plus the source and target language. So we'll have, let's say, with 3 target languages, we will have just 3 translation memories with the project name and then the language pair. And for the master translation memories, I chose the client as the basic, let's say, component, and then also the source and the target languages, plus the suffix master in parentheses, just to be sure that I know that this is going always to be my main or master translation memory, so that this doesn't get deleted easily. The same goes for term bases. Of course, I have some other elements that could be added here. We can also define the naming convention here. And for this, we could use, for example, the information about the client that is we still going to use, and we're going to use the information about the project maybe. And then we could have, I don't know, we would normally be adding a date maybe or something like that. But let's leave it the way it is right now. We can predefine the languages, but of course the languages, and that helps us to define some other elements as well. For example, automatic assignment. So I have decided to add some languages here, and here we have already the languages for Arabic, Chinese, Dutch, French, German, Hebrew, and Italian in this particular setup. And here we can also define how those documents are going to be assigned automatically. So some of them are going to be assigned directly just to one translator, and then put the administrator as the, let's say, reviewer, or the it could be the project manager here, of course, as a second reviewer to do the QA or just before the final delivery. But for German, we chose to use first accept, which means it will be sent to 2 translators, and the first of them to accept it will take this job. So this could also be done here. So as you can see, this can be done automatically as well. Now, the settings, here is where we can define, of course, the QA settings, for example, for the project. So which kind of settings we should be using for which language. We could have different sets of QA settings for different target languages. And also different other settings for those target languages, like machine translation settings, for example. We could have different machine translation engines used for every of those languages. And then this is where we also get to the very important settings, so the content source settings. This actually defines how the project will be updated throughout the cycle. What it means, normally this is this would be, let's say, the sort of semi-default setup. I mean, the default is actually with one box unchecked, but this would be, let's say, it could be the advised, let's say, or the suggested setup. So everything gets re-imported when it's changed. What I mean by that is when there's a new file added, for example, right, that's of course is going to be uploaded to the project. If the file is deleted from the project by the customer, it will be also deleted from the project. So, but if a file is changed, so I don't know, some content is added to the file, right, this will also be re-imported into the project. Now, there's also a question, there's always a question, what happens to files that are already underway? What should happen? And then this is the place where you can decide whether you want them to be re-imported or not. The same goes for deleted files. If the files get deleted from the project, right, from the folder, right, should they be deleted from the project? Maybe you don't want to do that. Maybe you want to delete them manually, just because you want to check with your translators whether they have already translated anything or not, and you might need to pay them, for example, right? So these elements can be decided here, and they are all in settings inside the content source connection settings. This is very important to set up, because otherwise you might suddenly start, I don't know, files start to disappear, or they don't get updated when they should be updated. You can also decide on the notification settings for the participants and for the project manager. If you don't want too many notifications, then you can simply just switch them off and just leave the participants, just to make sure that they already know what is going on. I'm going to leave this as it is right now, and we're going to move to automated actions. This is important for any kind of project based on templates, but here it's particularly important because we want to make sure that this whole thing is running in the way that we want, and that the updated files will also, have a way in the project to become updated. So what I have here is the project is created, the project gets launched. That's something that can be done, of course, also manually, but every now and again, it's actually a good idea to have this launch. I mean, to have this automated, because it just speed things up. The main problem with this for some is that once you launch a project, then the project starts to send out notifications. If you add files manually, then and then assign deadlines, then change deadlines, then import new files and so on, then it can be a little bit problematic. But because we are here actually automating this whole file import and assignment, right, this means that we don't necessarily need to worry about that, and we can just leave it to the automation. Now, what happens after document import? Here we can run several different scenarios. My scenario here is, okay, we first pre-translate, and the pre-translate options are as follows. So we pre-translate with good TM matches and from the master translation memory, and then we use machine translation on top of that. Some people, of course, don't want that. They just would use just exact translation, exact TM matches, or even context matches for pre-translation. And some would use any matches, because you want to just get as much as you can from the translation memory, and only then use machine translation, because machine translation costs you extra. There are just different ways of doing that. Then confirming, locking, again, your choice, which level is best for you. I mean, whether the translation memory can be trusted, and you can actually already lock those segments, or you want them left confirmed, or maybe you don't want them confirmed at all. They will be still checked by the translators. You can add versioning. Of course, the versioning would allow you to save the version of the translation before and after the pre-translation. That might make sense if you want to go back to the just to compare what happened, with the versions between different stages. And then statistics. You can perform statistics here, or you can turn it off here, and then you can run the analysis separately. That's what I'm doing here. So we have an analysis that is going to be, so we will run statistics, and we will create an analysis report that will be saved on the server. You might need that for your translators, for example, right? So after the pre-translation, you want to have this analysis that you can send to your translators later on. It's also important, and this is very, very, very important here, is that we have those analyses created on a regular basis at almost every stage, for two reasons. One is them, of course, just to keep track of what is going on. But then the most important thing is just to be able to compare if there are any changes between the different stages of the project, that you always know how much still needs to be translated, what has been translated, and you can make those calculations so that you know what you should be paid, and what you should pay later on your translators, for example. Then we assign the documents automatically to users. We can, of course, change this. I've used the calculate the hours from daily capacity using weighted word counts, or we can just turn it off to get slightly longer deadlines. And then, or we could actually make this a different type of calculation. You can, of course, change the deadline later, but sometimes we just need at least a basic deadline to start with. And then what I have here is we return to source. Now, this is not necessary here. I just put it there. Of course, we don't have to. This is one of those actions that we can add, of course, from this list, just like we added the other ones. Why would I put it this? What this actually means? This means that the file will be exported and it will be returned to the folder that we took it from, actually to a target folder that we defined in the connection before. This here, it actually, I mean, put it actually immediately after document import and combined with the machine translation that we used in the pre-translation stage, allows us to create some kind of a black box for machine translation out of MemoQ. So we will immediately get our files translated with machine translation plus what we have in the translation memory. And then we can still assign them to translators. And once they finish, once the whole review is delivered, for example, they will be uploaded to the source back with the updated version. So this allows us to have a kind of interesting workflow here. So first send the machine translation part, and then still work on the review, and then deliver this again to MemoQ. Now we have reviewer to delivers document. Let's change this. I'm not going to, and then return to source. Let's change to, let's say, a document completes workflow, and then we can also, and then we can add return to source. This will mean that while the document completes workflow, it will be automatically pushed to the target folder. What does it mean, complete workflow? Just to be clear, so MemoQ goes through MemoQ documents, right? They go through this workflow stages. Like first, there's just unassigned or not defined, really. Then there's translation not started, translation in progress. Then review started, review in progress, review 2 started, review 2 in progress, and then completed. But it really depends how many steps, how many workflow steps you have in the project. If you only have translation, then the workflow completes after translation. If you have translation and review 1, then the workflow completes after review 1. So it really will depend on your workflow, and this will also help you to deliver multiple times if you decide to add a reviewer to the workflow still within the project. So let me click OK. We have all the different all the different setup here. And let's create now this project based on this connection. How do we do that? We create a new online project from template. And here we need to choose the content connector. We connect to our content connector. And we choose our G Drive shared project B. This is the one that we wanted. And we click next. We use the template that we wanted here. We need to put so this is the template we created. We have those 3 languages defined in this template. Sorry, not in the template. In the template, we had more languages, if you remember, but this comes from the connection, right? So the definition of the connection. We put the client, let's say, call it MemoQ, and we call the project. Let's call the project will be a kind of a numeric value, right? That will be kind of a reference number maybe in our system. And we finish. And we have some information about missing people who won't have much work to do in this project, but they're still assigned there. I mean, assigned to just put in the people section. But let's say, okay, well, let's keep them. Maybe they be necessary or needed later. So right now we get this empty project. Okay, here it is. And this is an automatic project, so it is running on autopilot. We can disable the autopilot, just the basic, let's say, level of the autopilot, of course, here. We can do it later, but let's just not do it. Let's just leave it as it is. And let's get the content from source. Now, the MemoQ, we need to get it first connected, but MemoQ will basically try and connect to the source about every 6 minutes. So whenever there's a change, then you can get those files. And as you remember, we set up the import filter to, not the import filter, but the import rules, right, to import XML files into Italian, IDML files into German, and the Word files into French. Of course, we could also define the input filters for those. I mean, if we need some particular input filters in the template, for example. And as you can see, we have all them here translated. When I just refresh, because it takes a moment, okay, we will see that they have already been assigned as well, right? So we have our German file assigned to with first accept. And then we have our Italian and French file assigned to the translator T4. If we go to history, right, we will be able to see in the history what happened to this file. So here where we have our information, okay, this is all assigned, analysis reported, pre-translated, finished, right, and then action type, return to source. So all those files were returned to source. So let's check, let's go and see whether those files were really added to the source. Let's check directly in our customers folder. Let's go to project B. And as you can see, we have all those 3 folders with our target files inside. So we have the XML file in the Italian text, in the Italian project target text, and we have the IDML file for the German, and we have the French for the one. We can even open this one now here and see what happens with this file, whether this was translated or not. And as you can see, we have a French version of the text. This comes from machine translation, of course. Now, when we, so let's close this. Let's go back to MemoQ. If we now have the translator go into the text, make some corrections, and deliver, right, then this file will go to the administrator as the second reviewer, right? And then the reviewer will make some changes. So, and then they can deliver. Once they finish, when they complete, right, the file will be returned to the source one more time. And they will, let's even just do that, okay? So let's imagine that we're the translator. I mean, I'm going to be the, let's say, I'm going to just open this in WebTrans very quickly as the administrator. So I'm going to be the second reviewer actually right now. And we will try and make some changes to the translation so that we have our changes also exported then later on to the customer. We will also then later on, if we have the time, right, we will try to update the source text as well and see what happens here on our end. Okay, so okay, so I've been trying to do this too many times, and that's why it's not working right now. Okay, I'm going to check out the project locally. It'll be faster that way. Okay. And let's go to our project. Here, I'm the second reviewer. And let's say I'm going to, instead of having the French translation, right, I'm going to select everything and I'm going to copy the source. So just to get the English text back. I know it doesn't make much sense, but of course, that's not, we're just aiming for some modifications. And let's synchronize, let's close this project now. We're going back to our online project. This is synchronized. Now I'm going to change the workflow status of this document to completed. And let's see in the history what happens. Okay, let's refresh the history. And we will say, you see translation, new workflow status completed, automated action started, return to source, document returned to the source. Now, if we go back to our Google Drive, we are now in our customer's place, right? We have the, we have our project here, and you will see that the date last modification is 6 past 1, which is just about now. When we open this document, it is now in English, right? So we returned the other version. So as you saw, this was very quick and was generally, thank you, Kevin, for the comment. Okay, I'm going to slow down a little bit. Yes. Now let's just have a look at at some changes on the other side. So let's make some changes in the source text. So let's open this document. And let's make some changes. Let's say, okay, we don't want this part at all. Let's remove those paragraphs. And let's leave just the 3 paragraphs and remove even the image as well. Okay, let's close now. Okay, there we go. So we have changed this file. What happens to the project, right? Let's see what we have here. Let's go to our translations, okay? And let's get changes from source. We'll see what happens. As you can see, what happened here, version of the document changed to 2.0, which means that the source file was changed, was updated. The file got updated. Now, what we did in the template, we also defined that the file should be pre-translated, but first X-translated as well. X-translation means that the previous version of the document will be inserted wherever you can. This is not always possible, of course, because the change document may be so different from the original document that X translation will not do much good. But but it is usually the first thing to do. The next thing would be to pre-translate. So as you can see, this was already pre-translated. Now, if you remember, we also had return to source after the change of this file. So let's go back to our folder. Right, and let's go back to our French file over here. As you can see, the last modification was here. If we go now to our folder, we will see that we only have those 5 paragraphs, not everything that we had at the very beginning. The question, yeah, thank you, Kevin, for answering the question about the version. Let me show you the numbers. So the first number before the decimal point, right, okay, is the source file version. The second number is the translation version. So this is a minor version. Usually you would have several different translation versions throughout the project. Actually, if translators are using WebTrans a lot, then you might get even as far as 100 versions or something like that. Now, if you have an update to the source, then the number of the source version changes, and the translation sort of gets reset to 0 again, right? So you start the translations from scratch. But if you use X-Translator, you can reinsert the translations from the previous version. Okay, so let me just answer some of the questions. So that would be generally it. So really, thank you for listening. Just to show you how this can be connected. Now I will try and answer some of your questions. First, the question regarding Google Docs and Google Drive. Yes, that is true. You cannot integrate Google Docs. Google Docs as such is a format that cannot be read outside of Google environment, really. So it needs a conversion. Now, this InSync tool, I mean, this is an external tool, not affiliated with MemoQ or Google, but it sort of extends the possibilities of Google Drive and of OneDrive as well. What it does, it can actually convert the files to Microsoft formats when you import those files from the client. So imagine your client puts everything in Google Docs. What you can do, what the InSync can do, can actually convert those files into Google Docs, into Microsoft Word, and then they can be imported into your project. So that's kind of a conversion that goes with this tool. The question, will the client be able to follow the progress of the document that is being translated? How will the client know which is the final version of the file? Yeah, that's a very good question. The client will not be able to follow the progress of the document that is being translated. So in this setup with this, let's say, black box with machine translation, when you first just machine translation the document and then deliver this to the customer already, and then you deal with the review, then this is the part that is tricky. You cannot easily, tell which is the final version of the document. So that would be some kind of a message for the customer later on. Okay, you have the final version of the document, or you simply skip this delivery after the pre-translation. This is just to show you that it's possible, but in reality, in your situation, it might not be a good idea, because if the client is always checking those folders for those final files and, okay, when are you going to deliver? Where is my file? Why am I still waiting? Then, yeah, then maybe it's not always a good idea to send them the machine translation and tell them, oh, look, this is just the, the first draft, right? Is there a possibility to cancel some ongoing automated action like pre-translate if we notice we've done something wrong or need to change settings? The automated actions cannot be cancelled just like that. You can turn off automated actions in total, but that's really not recommended because it breaks the template and all the automation you have there. So from that moment on, you would have to do everything manually. But if you turn off the autopilot in the project, you always get this warning, okay, or let's say a wizard, so to speak, a mini wizard. What do you want to do? Are you sure? Right? Basically, are you sure you want to turn it off? This basic let's say, disabling of the autopilot is okay. I mean, if you click OK, if you click yes, it will just allow you to perform some additional actions manually. So if you made a mistake, I mean, the automatic translation, let's say automatic translation went through or something like that. If you turn off the autopilot without disabling the automated actions, but only the basic level of the autopilot, this allows you to control the project still manually. What does it mean? You can, for example, now pre-translate those documents yourself. So you decide, okay, I need to have an additional, let's say, round of pre-translation, or you reset the status of the segment, or you go inside and change something. So all those things that that you normally wouldn't necessarily be able to do, or you want to have, for example, create an additional analysis of the project, that's also something you can do right now. You also have access to your translation memory. So if you suddenly realize that there is one translation memory for French that you forgot to add, or that should be added to this project, then now it's the time where you can do that. So you can select from your translation memories on the server, or you can import some files into a translation memory from here as well. So this allows you to get this manual control. Yeah, so the sharing your folder with the client rather than the other way around. This is basically an easier way. So you don't need InSync for that. You can do that without this connection. But if sometimes the client has dozens of projects already on Google Drive, categorized, put in subfolders and so on, and they just don't want to drag and drop. They don't want to bother, so they share those projects with you, and that's when it's actually starting to get more difficult. Polling frequency. Let's say I set up MemoQ to check a connection source once a day. Is there a way to specify the time for the polling request, for example, 6 a.m.? I don't think there is. I think you can only set up the frequency. So if you really want to do that, but I'm not really sure. I understand the question why you would want that. That sort of happens automatically at 6 a.m. Before you get to work, for example, right? So when you come to work, everything is synced up. Yeah, I think that's difficult. I think once you would probably need to create the project at 6 a.m. to get it, every 24 hours, let's say. Or just do it manually after you return, and then just because at any given moment you can still manually get the changes from the source. So that will happen automatically, but you can also manually get the changes from the source. Can you switch the damned autopilot off by default? Is a major stability block for PMs? No, I don't think you can. This is still part of the template setup, so you cannot do that. Maybe maybe. No, I don't think that's just. Yeah, I know that everyone is turning off autopilot, but let's if this is a feature request, probably we can take it up with the IDEA portal, right, and see whether this could be put inside the template maybe setup, right? If we create a template, you could make this part of the template setup. Can this process be applied or helpful in any way for BMS integration situation like Plunet? Well, Plunet integration uses a different kind of integration. So this uses using the web services API. So it's a different, like everything is actually done through the API. Also, the import the import of the files. So theoretically, if this is if the project is created, I'm not sure whether this is possible to create a connected project through Plunet. Probably not, but maybe it is possible to create a project first in MemoQ and then sync it back to Plunet. I'm not really sure. I would have to check that, and I will get back to you on this one. Can you pause imports entirely? I don't think you can pause imports. You can change. There are some settings you can make. You can change here. So I will check on that if there is a way to pause the imports entirely at a certain moment. Theoretically it's possible to change. It's possible to change the polling, but I'm not sure it will always apply. Let's just go to the overview, project automation. Yeah, that's clear. And let's go through the connection here. Yeah, so here you could change the polling frequency. Well, theoretically, you cannot go lower than 0.1, right? So you could just go up. So I don't think that you could actually pause it here. Maybe you could just increase it temporarily so it doesn't connect for a moment, and then. But I think that's not really part of the setup. Again, it's an interesting feature. So request. So I will actually make note, and we will see whether this could be introduced in some way in the future. So thank you very much for these questions, because they also an inspiration for us to think about different design and making some changes. Thanks a lot. We will be closing in about 30 seconds, and hope you enjoyed this. And yeah, let's. I will also have a meeting later on customer portal. So let me also invite you to that. Thanks again, and have a great day.